Hi, Dan Milner, Capricorn. Favorite color is green. Shoe size 10. Damn glad to meet you. So this is a Q&A. It's one of the best Q&As that I've done in a long time, even though I haven't done it yet. I've been using this Sony camera for everything. I've been having a blast over the last couple of days just messing around with this camera because I've only ever used this camera for doing exactly what I'm doing right now. On camera, full frame, 21.8, fall off. Microphone that doesn't require cable, plugs into the hot shoe, little bit, it's like 3-directional mic. Very good job, Sony. I know zero tech about what I'm talking about. All I know is it works, and it works pretty well. So I've been having a fun time experimenting, and I got a bunch of good questions in. The primary question here is gonna take, the first question is gonna take 15 minutes alone, but it's a good one because it's a good story, it's a personal story, it's an industry story, and it could be a history story, like when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor. Okay, the first question was, what do you think about Leica reintroducing the M6 camera? After I got done laughing, I was like, you know what, that's a valid question. And I wasn't laughing at Leica, I was laughing at something else that is monumentally important in this story, which is probably gonna get overlooked. And it shouldn't, because to me it's the most important thing. But I need to give you a little history here. Okay, a lot of history here. This is gonna take forever, and I'm probably only gonna get through maybe a total of 4 questions before I hit the wall. This is not a camera. So question 1, did I mention this was question 1? Question 1 is, what do you think about Leica reintroducing the M6? This is not a camera that I'm interested in. I don't have any particular interest in buying this camera. I have an M6 and an M4. We're gonna get to that in a minute. I'm glad they did this, but personally, I have no connection to this. I don't have any association with Leica. I never have had an association with Leica. They have sent me equipment a few times over the years, but that was only when I had personal contacts in the company. I don't think as a company they would have ever touched me. I've also taught workshops for them. I don't think they would ever do that again. And when I taught workshops for Leica, I taught one, and I know that they called every other person in my region before they called me. I was their last resort. So that tells you my relationship with this camera, even though I use this camera more than any other camera in my career. So I was talking to Elena Dorfman the other day, who's the person I teach with in Albania. We're also going to teach and do a class in Lebanon, 2024. And we were talking about analog. And I said, oh, I have this idea for a project on the border using analog. It's referencing a project I did in 1990 when I went to the border for the first time. I thought it would be fun to go back and shoot the same cameras I did in 1990 with analog just for fun. I don't have any goal with that project. I'm not going to, try to get famous. I don't want to gain views. It's just a personal thing that I do for fun because I'm kind of quirky that way, if you haven't noticed. So we had 3 students this year in Albania that used film. One shot film entirely. So never saw any of his own work during the time we were there, just like the old days. I have a great appreciation for that. And then 2 used film and digital, which is what my plan will be in May of next year when we go back to Albania. I am going to commission this Analog Albania. And I'm going to encourage all the other students to at least incorporate a little analog into this mission, whether that be using Fuji Instax or actually shooting film. So I think what I'm going to do is take my Nikon FM3T, which is not a camera that I've used a whole lot, but it's really small. And a fast 50, I have a Zeiss 51-2 lens that I think I'll probably take with me just for fun, throw some Tri-X in. And what I like about this, and with me, you know there is always a book at the end of the conversation. When you shoot analog products, you end up with more tangible items. You have contact sheets, you have negatives, and you have ephemera that you can then use to help design and build your book. I think that's interesting. With digital, you don't quite have the same things. You can kind of fake those, but they look like fake stuff, which is why, to me, film and digital are separate. Don't waste your time trying to make your digital files look like film because you're never going to quite get there. They're just separate things, and it's often a waste of time and a bad conversation, and one that software engineers have been having forever. They're still trying to mimic a 70-year-old emulsion, and that just is bizarre to me. So anyway, that was point number 1, kind of, even though I didn't really, that was kind of a sub-point category B. 1999. I quit Eastman Kodak. In 1997, I took a job with Eastman Kodak. At the end of 97, I looked at my portfolio. So I graduated from photojournalism school in 92. Of course, straight A student, 4.0. Graduated, barely. And worked for 5 years as a photographer. 97 rolls around, and I'm like, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. And I looked at my work from that year, which was primarily freelance editorial work. And I was like, this is utter crap. This work is not mine. This work is some photo editor for People magazines. By the way, People magazine photo editor in LA at the time is one of the coolest people I've ever met in photography. Her name was Martha. She was fantastic. But I did a lot of assignments for a lot of different people. Actually, no, I take that back. Martha wasn't with People. She was with Time. But she was in the same office as the photo editor for People, who was this German woman whose name I don't remember. Anyway, I was like, this isn't my work. I don't even know who I am. So I quit. I was like, I'm done. At the same exact time, Kodak came snooping around like they do. Guys in suits and Buick Pontiac Grand Prix. Hey, buddy, you want to be a Kodak rep for the professional division in Los Angeles? Yes, I do. So I took that job, and I had to sign a conflict of interest letter stating that I would no longer do assignments because that would mean I was competing with my customers, and I didn't care. A lot of my friends said, you should use an assumed name and continue to do your assignments on the side using this fake name so you can continue that work because you spent 5 years building up your career, and now you're going to throw it away. And I said, you know what? Wrinkled it up, threw it away. I said, I don't care. These assignments are crap. And it looks great on the surface, but internally, I'm dying, my friends. I'm dying over here. So I quit. And in the process, I sold all of my equipment. At the time, I was a Canon EOS 1V zoom lens guy. That was sort of the rig for editorial freelance people at the time, especially with a photojournalism flavor, a little sprinkling of photojournalism. That was kind of a standard rig. Those were great cameras, but they were not the cameras that I wanted to carry around, and they didn't provide me the kind of image I really wanted. Because in 1990, I had purchased an M4P Leica with a 28, and that camera haunted me. It haunted me because I knew that was the camera for me. So I sold everything. Crazy side story. A photographer in San Diego calls me, finds out I'm selling this equipment, and he says, I've got an M6 and a 35 f2, monospheric, and I want that Canon zoom lens that you have, that 70 to 200 or whatever it was. The black one, before the lenses were white, they were black. And he said, I'll trade you straight up. This camera and this lens, M6 35 f2 for this lens. I said, dude, that is a horrible deal for you. What are you doing? Are you on the paint now? Are you huffing paint in a bag while we're talking on the phone? No, turns out he was just out of his mind. In a deluge, he drove to Laguna. We made the swap. So all gone is all my gear. 2 zooms and the crappy Canon 51.4 that fell apart every 2 days. And in was the Leica. For the next 4.5 years, all I did was my own projects, my own way, on my own time with the Leica. That was it. That's all I did. And at the end of that time, I was like, oh, that's who I am as a photographer. When you can lay out 6, 7, 8 bodies of work that are consistent from body to body, project to project, you've finally figured out what your style is. And so I was like, okay, this is really important. That's how I really came to the Leica thing. The Leica is a terrible camera. It's terrible. It is a terrible camera for almost everything. But for what it's designed for, it is arguably the best camera ever made. And also, arguably, the most historical camera ever made. Because if you go back through photojournalism, reportage, documentary, it was 26 this morning, 24 maybe. And I got my nose is running. I got to blow a snot rocket, and I would now, but it would probably land here, and I don't want that. So I'm just going to continue to sniffle. Terrible camera. What it's designed for works fantastic, which you have to know going in. You're not going to get this to shoot sports. It's not really a portrait camera. You're not going to use it in the studio lighting stuff, typically. There's other cameras that are better. You're not going to go birding with it unless you're photographing actual birders themselves, in which it would be a totally viable thing. But, you know, there's no 200 to 600 lens for this thing that you're going to get close, do that kind of thing. It's just a different thing. Know that going in. But let's talk about film cameras in general. And I want to talk about f3, f4, f5, f6. When I came into photography and I had f3s, I had FM2s first, and then I graduated to f3s. I got my little certificate, my plaque, and stood in line, shook a guy's hand, you know, did the whole thing, got an f3. The time between f3, f4 was like 5 years, at least. And the professional market gap was massive. So you had to wait 5 years. If there was 10 things wrong with an f3, they fixed them when they came out with the f4. They updated it, they modernized it, and they came out. Same was true f4, f5. But there was a monumental shift that happened in the late 90s. And that is digital technology arrived. And with it, the decision of the second largest consumer photography market in the world, which is Japan, behind the United States, When the Japanese market, consumer and prosumer market, proved a willingness to buy more than one new camera per year, the arms race was on. Gone was the idea of holding out for 4 or 5 years and perfecting a camera. And in was fix one of the 10 things, launch a new camera, because Johnny over there is going to keep buying it. And if you fix the second thing that's wrong with it 6 weeks later, he's going to buy that camera too. It was incredible. Sure Shot 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I had friends who were sponsored by these companies, and every 6 to 8 weeks there was a new camera in their mailbox. And they would say to me, this is the one. This is the one. I swear, the old one sucked. This one is perfect. This is the exact camera. And I would say, it doesn't have a viewfinder. It has a shutter lag. It's not a full-frame chip. This is not the camera. This is a piece of crap, and you just don't know it because you're drunk on this new technology. And sure enough, 6 weeks later, they'd say, oh, that old one, total crap. No idea why I ever liked that. This is the one. I did a blog post called Friends Don't Let Friends Buy Digital Point-and-Shoot Cameras. They were horrible. But they just came rapid fire. Remember the Ricoh GR film point and shoot that all the hipsters love now? That thing was a great camera. It was the width of a roll film, and it had a great lens, and it was tiny and responsive. Then came the digital, version 1, version 2, horrible cameras. I'm sorry, Ricoh, they were junk. Not a good camera to use. And they had that little weird like snorkel thing that you look down to viewfind. Awful cameras. All my friends bought them. This is great, this is great, this is great. 6 weeks later, I'm like, where's your Ricoh? Oh, I sold it. Yeah, that's what I thought. Let's talk M's now, in general. Like I said, terrible camera except for what it's designed for, and then it's really good. So don't get this thing thinking that you're gonna be cool, because here's the thing about Leica people. Leica people, more than any other brand, buy these cameras and don't use them. They buy them, they stand around, predominantly dudes. Let's face it, dudes, we got the geek gene big time. I don't see a lot of women doing this. This goes all the way back to 1990, San Antonio Camera Exchange, buying that M4P. Old dudes coming in, Leicas around their neck, all dolled up. I'm like, where's your work? No one wants to talk about that because they really don't use them. More than any other brand, I've never seen it happen like this, where people get there and they are the bad cliche. This is a piece of jewelry as opposed to someone who's going out and really using this camera. So don't be that person. Let's talk about M history. M2, legendary. M3, legendary. M4, legendary. M5, not so good. M5 is the tartan prancer of cameras. And if you don't know what the tartan prancer is, do yourself a favor, crack a beer, go to YouTube, look up tartan prancer. That's what the M5 was. The M5 made all of us question our sanity. It made us question the entire country of Germany. I would throw Canada in there because I love to throw Canada under the bus for whatever reason. Go ahead, throw Canada in there as well. The M5 was not good. Not good, not good. When the M6 came, in my opinion, it was as much relief of anything else. Relief that it wasn't an M5. The M6 was made of lighter zinc alloy or whatever material it was. It's lighter, which is, you know, better, technically maybe better than the M4. I have both, and I'll take my M4 over the M6 any day of the week. We'll get to that in a minute. M6 had a meter. Was it a great meter? Was it a Nikon matrix meter? Not even close. When you're shooting transparency on deadline in an M6, you are much better off with a handheld meter. And if you're shooting Tri-X, you don't need a meter. So the M6 meter for me as a sales thing was like, I don't use it anyway. So this is not a sale. I'd much rather have my M4. The M4 had more brass. And now here's the thing. I'm gonna quote a New Mexico politician here who said, quote, guy got in trouble recently, by the way. He said, I have no facts or data to support my opinion. I just went with my gut. That's why I live in New Mexico, man. That kind of logic, whew, right to the top. I was told this by someone at Leica, but I don't know. I never verified it. He said the M4 has fewer working parts, far more brass, way solid, more solid camera. It's much smoother on the wind. The M4 has no meter, no battery, no nothing. It's really clean when you look through it. It feels better in my hands than the M6 does. It's always been that case. The M6 feels tinny to me, and I don't use the battery. The M7 was odd. The M7 came, and by this time digital was exploding, film was dropping off. The M7's dial went in the opposite direction than all of these other versions of Leica. So if you're using M6 for 5 years, and I've had 4 M6 cameras in my life, when your camera's to your eye and you're making adjustments on the shutter speed dial or the aperture dial, you don't want those dials to suddenly move in the opposite direction. It's the same thing that happened when Nikon lost the market to Canon. And so many people who had switched over to Canon sent their lenses back into Canon to have the focusing direction reversed because they'd spent so much time with Nikon cameras and Canon focused in the opposite direction. And so people couldn't handle that. So they had their lenses converted back to the Nikon focusing direction. The M7 felt that way. Then the MP came along. I almost bought an MP, but there were mechanical issues with that camera. I love the old style rewind crank, which I'm going to talk about in a minute because this is a real problem. I like the old style rewind crank where that pops up and it lies flush, but it's slow. That camera, I've had quite a few friends who had those and had mechanicals. So that camera was great in theory. I think the MP is a great camera that works for people who pose with their camera. But if you're in the field putting 20, 30, 40, 50 rolls of film through this thing in a day, I don't think it's going to hold up. Hopefully the new M6 does. Okay, so that's a little context there. I will take my M4 any day of the week. Now, why does any of this matter? This is the crux pitch of this entire film. So everyone calm down. Put your pajamas on, get some popcorn, and settle in. Get your sleeping bag. My sleeping bag's on the couch over here because every night I go out and I lay and I watch the stars. I saw an insane meteor shower at 4 a.m. the other day. Number one, anything that keeps film alive is fantastic. So Leica reintroducing this camera is a great thing. Kodak hiring technicians and talking about building coating alleys, that is a great thing. It's going to keep film alive and hypothetically, it will drive prices down. Now, post-COVID, even though we're still mired in the middle of it in terms of business-wise, cost of raw materials, shipping, transport, staffing, cost of goods and services are through the roof. Inflation is high. If you've bought food, I tried to buy hamburger buns the other day. They were $9 for a package of hamburger buns. I was like, you know what? F you, I'm not buying these. That's never going to change until we stop buying stuff. I don't know if Kodak making new coating alleys and bringing back film is going to bring the price down or not. I have my suspicions about that. But anything that helps people maintain the choice of using film is a great thing. Number two, this entire thing, and again, I'm going to quote the New Mexico politician. I have no data to support my opinion. I just went with my gut. This entire M6 revival, the entire thing, is based on a handful of YouTube film photographers. That's it. There's no one in the pro market that said to Leica, gee, I really wish you brought the M6 back. No one cares. The guys I know, the people who are in the photojournalism field who are shooting Leica, are fine with their M's and their Q2s. They don't want to go back to film. That died in the Iraq War, 2004, 5, 6-ish, where guys that were shooting hybrid film and digital realized editors weren't waiting around anymore. Even if the film would have looked better, they didn't care. They were sacrificing it for immediacy. That was sort of the end. It's not to say that there aren't people out there doing this. It is not the common thing, and it won't be ever again. That ship sailed. I think it is a handful of YouTube film people who have massive followings, and these followings will do and say anything that the guru is saying. If they use Portra and an M6, they're all going to go buy Portra and an M6 for whatever reason. They could have bought an M3 and used Portra, and Leica would have been faced with having to try to bring back an M3 because all of these people out there are going to do this. It's the weirdest thing. It's the Pied Piper kind of philosophy. But that's my opinion of the only reason why this is happening at all is probably 2 or 3 people worldwide who have huge followings that happen to use an M6. But here's the part, the most important part. Write this down with your Uniball Jetstream black-green ink, by the way. Green-black ink, hot, sexy. Think 5-star. What I love about the fact that my theory is that this whole camera comes about because a handful of YouTube people is it shows the power to the people. There was a monumental shift in the photography industry in the 90s when manufacturers realized the pro market was no longer leading the way. The prosumer market was leading the way. Prosumers had time, money, there were exponentially more of them, and they were driven to get better, and they would buy more than one new camera a year. Manufacturers said, you know what, these pros, okay, fine, we'll do it. We'll do, artisans of imagery. We'll do these high levels, these are our chosen 10 people or whatever, but really we're going after the prosumer market. That's the big market. This shows the power of the prosumer market. It's finally like closed the door. If they're building coating alleys and Leica's reintroducing a camera that died however many years ago, that shows the pro industry is less and less relevant and the prosumer industry is really where the money is. Kind of cool. Number 3, I didn't read really the spec sheet on this new camera, but I did see that there was something like a brass top plate. And this is really smart, because if this is true, and again, should I have taken the time to research what this camera is? Probably. Did I? No. Do I feel bad about it? Absolutely not. Putting a brass top plate on and black paint is absolutely brilliant, because here's the thing. Leica geeks are geekier than anyone you can possibly imagine. They will spend incredible amounts of money to get a camera they never use. They will spend incredible amounts of money on a strap, on a soft release, on a little case, on what it looks like hanging around them. It's the most bizarre thing in the world. Most of these people are terrified of talking about imagery. They don't know how to edit, they don't know how to sequence, they don't know how to make books. They also really don't know about much like light, timing, composition, the basic elements of what makes great photography. It's all centered on the device. It's a bizarre thing. Cycling has its people like this, fly fishing has its people like this. Leica brings these out like crazy. The look of the camera, of the Leica, more than any other brand by far, is key. And the more that camera brasses, the better it is. The case in point is, look at Jim Marshall's old cameras. How much are those worth now? How many Leica geeks reference Jim Marshall's cameras? And if you don't know who Jim Marshall is, like, shame on you. If you're in photography and you don't know who that guy is and what he's done, that's embarrassing to me. So you should know who that is. His cameras have been photographed and exhibited, and those images have been printed a gazillion times. And it's because of how they look. I know guys who bought the Leica MP and took SOS pads and brassed a brand new camera, rubbed the paint off to make it look a certain way. Don't lie. I've seen you do it. I know who you are, and there's more of you than you can possibly imagine. It's embarrassing. So putting a brass top plate and putting paint on it means the paint's going to wear off, the camera's going to brass, and the geeks are going to love it even more. That is a conscious decision, in my opinion. I would have done the same thing, because if you're in sales, these leads are crap. I want to sell stuff. Number 4, this camera, in my opinion, and I don't know this for sure because I didn't take the time to look at it, this camera has a major Achilles heel. If, in fact, they left the rewind knob, the rewind knob that is diagonal to the camera body, so the rewind, the little circular device with the little arm that pops up that you spin to rewind your film, that is the Achilles heel of this camera. That's the Achilles heel of the M6. Because when you drop that camera, or you're shooting and you're getting pushed around, your cops are pushing you, or you're in the middle of a riot and you bang into a wall and you hit that rewind knob, it bends and you can't rewind the film. This has happened to me twice, and the M4 has the same problem. I dropped an M6 once about this far, and it landed on that rewind crank, and it was inoperable, and I had to send the camera to Leica to get it repaired. It's not happened on the M4 yet, but inevitably it will. It is a major problem. The M4 also has another glitch, which means if you don't crimp the leader when you load the film, you can get 12 rolls in, and that roll will jam. Everything feels fine until 12 frames, and then it jams if you don't crimp the leader. It's not that big of a deal, because once you learn how to crimp the leader, it's fine, and I haven't really had a problem since then, but if you don't crimp the leader, you will have a problem for the most part. The M6, and here's the other thing, Leica, as far as I know, does not have a professional services division like Canon and Nikon and Sony do. So these are things that you pay for, and you get expedited repairs and also loaner equipment while your gear is being repaired. I don't know if Leica has that service. I really hope they do, because if professionals are going to use this, first of all, you're not going on assignment with one camera. You're going to need 2 minimum. If you were on assignment for someone and your camera broke and you only had 1 camera, to talk about the dressing that you are going to get, the verbal beatdown that you will get from a client for not being prepared. So when you're talking about this camera, which I think is $5,500, and you need 2 cameras, it's a lot of money invested. And again, can you get that camera repaired and expedited? I don't know. That is the Achilles heel of that camera. But let me say this. Leica has always been known for durability, and overall I would agree to that. However, I've had the clutch break, I've lost a shutter, I've had the rewind crank come loose and fall off, and I've dropped it twice. Dropped it once, and then the other time was banged into someone at an assignment, and it bent that rewind crank, and the cameras were inoperable. So no camera is foolproof. I've had pretty much every camera I've ever used go down. The F3 I had was a certain batch where there was an inherent flaw where the camera would default to 60th of a second. My f4 first generations were horrible. I couldn't keep them out of the shop. On the flip side, the Canon EOS 1V was indestructible. Probably, I'd never had a single hiccup with that camera ever. I'm never going to use that camera again, but it was fantastic. My Fujifilm cameras. I don't think I've had any breakage or cameras dying in the Fujifilm. I've had Canon cameras overheat in the tropics when I was working down there, forcing me to go back, and thankfully I had a Hasselblad on that shoot, and I was able to continue shooting with a Hasselblad because the Canons overheated and I couldn't use them. So that was the Achilles heel. The cost of this camera, $5,500. Look, if they can get it, great, get it. Leica people are willing to pay almost anything, so I totally get it. They probably could have done that more. The last thing I'm going to say about this. There is something about the film look, right? That's why a lot of people like to shoot film. It has a look. It has a depth to it that you don't necessarily get with digital. I did put a Leica 50 on my A7C last week doing a test. I was just shooting something in my office, like on the table. It wasn't an image I was going to use. And, you know, I looked at the file and I was like, oh, of all the cameras I have, that's probably the closest film look. But again, digital is different. I don't try to take my digital files and magically turn them into Tri-X. I just let the digital be what it is and accentuate the strong points of it in the software. That's the key. It's a separate thing. But the look of film is not the most important thing for me. There's 2 points that are more important. The first is the lifestyle. Typically with film, it means less time in front of the computer. And I think any of us who find a way to spend less time in front of the computer, we are coming out ahead in the long run. I think most of us spend far too much time in front of the computer. I know I do. My blurb job used to be much more of a field position. I was traveling to Europe and Canada and Australia and all across the US on a regular basis, sometimes 8, 9, 10 weeks at a time straight. That's not happening now because of COVID, and I'm not sure we're ever going to go back to that kind of thing. So I spend far more time in front of a computer now. It's not that much fun. So anything that'll alleviate some of that, like using film, could be great. But I also think too, film archives. Film archives so well. If you have a correctly processed, archivally processed negative and you throw it in a shoebox or strip of Tri-X, in 100 years, it's gonna be there, most likely. Digital, to take a file and archive it digitally for the next 100 years, there is no one on the planet that knows how that's going to work and the cost associated with it. When I was towards the end of my photo career, I was shooting a lot of portraits. In fact, I did portraits for 7 years, nothing but portraits. And I would often get commissioned to do portraits. And when I would show up, they would use a word that I found bizarre, which was relieved. Oh, we're so relieved you're here to make these portraits. And I would say, that's bizarre. Are you excited or relieved? And they would say, relieved. Why are you relieved? Because we have no visual record left. It was on a phone. We lost the phone. Our iCloud service, ran out. Our child pushed a laptop off the counter, and all of our entire family history was on there. And I thought, oh, this is a rare occurrence. It wasn't. It was across the board. No one had anything left. Then I started interviewing people at archives and museums and saying, what are you guys doing? One person at one of arguably the best photo archive in the country said to me, we're at the beginning of a 40-year time frame where we will have nothing left. That's the truth, people. That's where we're at. Film archives really well. Yes, there can be a catastrophic thing. Herman Leonard's negatives in New Orleans in 2005 and Katrina hits, flooded. A lot of those negatives were saved, but it was a huge deal, cost a lot of money, a lot of people involved. Amazing archive. So yes, the film, if it's one location, it hasn't been digitized and it only exists in the negatives, yes, that could be a problem. But still, overall, it archives incredibly well. And that's exciting to me because I think good work appreciates over time. It doesn't diminish. It's not about immediacy. It's not about right now. I think the best work, especially doc work, is like a virus. It just sits and it waits and it waits and it adapts and morphs and goes out and keeps adapting. It gets stronger over time. That's what I like about film. That was question number 1. I think I went overboard on that a little bit. Was that too much? Too much? Not enough? Chuck, Pros, what are we at here? 30 minutes? I'm going to do one more question. Yes, it's going to be a Q&A, 2 questions. I have another film uploading, and then I got a call with my boss. Not the CEO, director of marketing, who's awesome. And by the way, 12 years at Blurb, I have worked for women 100% of the time, and I would not want it any other way. Women are superior. They're better, they're smarter. I don't know, they just see the world in a very different way. I'm glad I don't work for a dude. I really do. Now the CEO, he's a dude, but he's like a normal guy that you could talk to, and you know, he's like just a dude. He's a normal dude. So even though he's a CEO, he's a bigwig. He's got some power. But my boss, got a call with her, not exactly sure what we're talking about, which is always kind of fun. But old Dano here, I've been around for a while. So sometimes I have some strange things lodged away up in here that come in handy at some point or another. Okay. Question number 2 was wondering your experience with funding for projects. I'm working on several long-term projects over 4 years now and was thinking about seeing if local business or history society would want to sponsor some of the projects. Oh, wait a minute. I think I did this one before. Yeah, I think I did this before. I would do it on your own if you can. Why have anyone else put their fingers in the pot and like get you? They're going to try to get you to do things you don't want to do based on the fact they have no clue how photography works. That's my guess. Question number 3. Print sales, size and edition. Oh God, this could be another 20-minute, 30-minute question in itself. Is this focusing? Frickin' better be. I don't sell prints. I don't. When people inquire about prints, I say I don't sell prints. I'm too busy to do that, and I don't really have a slick system in place. There probably is a slick system out there that I could be using. It's just not a priority for me. Sizes and editions. How serious do you want to take this? This drives my photography friends crazy, my professional friends who are desperate, who are trying to make money selling prints. And the micro editions started, I don't know, several decades ago, where suddenly people were doing editions of 3, editions of 2 of big prints, right? And when the technology allowed people to take a 35mm image and print it 10 feet wide, everyone lost their mind. Big print associated with big price. That's why people did it. There was no other reason. Most of the time, a lot of those prints that size, they end up in storage containers because collectors buy them and are using them for investments, and they're hoping they appreciate, and at some point later down the road, they pull it out of storage and they sell it to someone else. Those prints never see the wall. A print size like 1620 to me is a great size. To the everyday person, 1620 is a huge print, but it's also small enough to find space on someone's wall. The biggest prints I have in here, probably the ones behind me, the Jeff Frost prints. I don't know, those are probably 30 by 40s. I literally have no other place in this house for another print that size. But if I bought an 810 or 1114 or 1620, yes, I could squeeze it in. So keep that in mind. When you're talking about editions, this is where you're gonna get yourself in hot water if you do not have a foolproof plan in place. Because if you ever sell a print to a collector, a real collector, and you screw up your edition count and suddenly there's another print in the series, you're gonna get your face sued off. That's what they do. When collectors buy prints, they are buying objects, not prints. They want something that is as unique as possible. That is why silver prints are still highly respected over inkjet prints, regardless of what any gallerist or curator tells you. They're trying to convince you that they're the same, but they're not, because collectors know that you cannot make 2 silver prints the same, meaning if they buy one, they have an object. They have a unique object and not a photographic print. But you better get your edition thing squared or you're in trouble, because here's the other thing that happens. You happen to do a series and you said, okay, I'm gonna sell these in 11, 14, 16 by 20 editions of 8. And for whatever reason, those become hot and you sell out. The worst thing ever is suddenly that same artist goes, oh, look, I discovered 30 work prints, artist prints from the same series. Oh, they just happen to be in another size and they're all artist prints. I see this all the time. This is what happens when someone underappreciates the work that they have, screws up on their editions, runs out of options, needs the money, and suddenly comes up with a bunch of work prints. Now, all the people who've invested in those original series sizes, they're like, wait a second. I bought this knowing there were only 8 of them in this series and 8 in the other, and now there's what, another 24? What's going on here? So it is a strange and baffling and awful thing. If you are going to edition, you better have a system of tracking that is absolutely foolproof, or you're going to get yourself in hot water. And anybody who tells you otherwise has either never done this or they just don't know what's happening. There have been a couple of very, very high-profile cases of this happening in the past few years. Famous photographer suddenly emerging with another size of a print, and collectors are not happy, man. They get crazy. Okay, last question. Let's see here. Photo contests. Who are the? Okay, yeah. Someone asked me about entering a photo contest. I don't enter photo contests. I've always despised photo contests. I think I've entered a couple in my entire career. I entered the first book prize through Duke University. I was a finalist for that back in the day. Wow, I also heard all kinds of shenanigans that went down behind the scenes on that contest. Kind of crazy, which does not surprise me in the slightest. Lots of controversies with contests over the years, whether it's POY, Pictures of the Year, World Press Photo. Those are legitimate, CCA, World Press Photo, POY, legitimate contests. What you want to know with a contest is who are the judges. You should look at a contest and say, oh my God, I cannot believe they got these people to judge this contest. Those are superstars. Those people are legends. That's what you want. If you look at a judging panel and you go, I don't know who any of these people are, that's not a good sign. Number two, what is the entry fee? Contests have become complete boondoggles and money grabs, and they've been this way for the last 15 years. I remember, I don't want to use names because I have friends in these places, but this got really, really out of hand at one point. And some of the contests said, we're not even going to hold these contests anymore because this has just become about taking money from people who are gullible enough to enter when we know all along the only people who are going to win are the established pros. So you got to be careful what you're entering. Third part is, what do you actually win? Do you win something of relevance, valid? Do you win an assignment? Do you win a portfolio review? What do you win that makes any sense at all, that would be, useful at some point? And finally, what's their history? Contests that I like, the Center in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Center holds 3 or 4 contests a year that are fantastic. Lens Culture out of Paris, their contests are great, and I entered one a few years ago just to see what would happen because I wanted to know what the process was and what the reward was. I was blown away. I entered, and I was going really fast, and I entered like a series, and I accidentally entered the series in like a single category, so they could only look at one of the images, and then the judge wrote me back and said, dude, if you'd entered this in the series, you might have won. And I said, well, full disclosure, I just did this as a test. But that person gave me a portfolio review, and that person was a legitimate working pro who gave me a badass portfolio review. I walked out of there like, wow, this was, if I had been like a civilian entering this for real, I would have been stoked. This was a great thing. So Lens Culture. Okay, that's it. 38 minutes, I'm done. I've got 2,900 other questions I didn't get to, but that Leica thing I think is interesting. It shows the power of the people, man. It's a couple of, in my opinion, I don't know who else would have been asking for this camera outside of a couple of film YouTubers and their masses of followings. I think that's interesting. That's a positive thing. I'm glad they brought it back. Kudos to them for doing this, because I'm sure it's going to be a lot of buzz for them. And, there's a nostalgia factor here. We know how powerful it is. It is what it is. I'll be back.